going to get into it, and we're going to do some position group grades. And we're going to start off with the offense. So we're going to get in here, and I'm going to size it up correctly. And we're going to start off with the quarterback position. So starting off with none other than Taylor Green. So last year, he becomes our starting quarterback. KJ Jefferson was here for 3 years. So we finally got a new quarterback, and I would say that he kind of exceeded the expectations, I think, of Razorback Nation in his first year, especially over what KJ Jefferson gave us last year. But ultimately, I'm giving this position a B plus. He was a guy that threw over 3,000 yards, 15 touchdown passes. I think he's going to be one of the more experienced quarterbacks in college football this year for the Razorbacks. Not too much outside of that that really changed in this position group. Malachi Singleton went out the door. He was the backup quarterback. Ultimately won us that Tennessee game. KJ Jackson will assume his role as the backup quarterback. He was the third string quarterback last year. I think he can do more for the team than Singleton did last year if, God forbid, he has to play. We added a couple guys, four-star recruit from the state of Arkansas, and Grayson Wilson, and then Trevor Jackson, a transfer in from Florida State. But ultimately, this grade really just depends on how well Taylor Green can play. I think as an experienced quarterback in the SEC, ultimately, I'm just going to give them a B plus. It's going to be one of our stronger positions, I think, this year. At the running back position, so this year we lose Jaquindon Jackson. He was a guy that came in last year and was a guy out of Utah, and so he was a really big player for us last year. He's right now fighting for a spot on the Jacksonville Jaguars, but he, I think, really exceeded expectations for the Arkansas Razorbacks last year. He was a guy that we didn't expect necessarily a lot out of, especially coming after some talented backs in the years before. So he was really a guy that did really well in the first half of the season. But we lose him, Rashad Dubinion, just a backup back as well. And we return Braylon Russell and Rodney Hill. So you look at the returning player section, two guys that didn't really accumulate a lot of yards, but I think will definitely have more production this year as guys that are going to really start for Arkansas, especially Braylon Russell, Arkansas product, guy 6'1", 240. I think he's going to have a really productive season this year, and he's going to split up a lot of his carries with Mike Washington Jr., a guy who's coming in from New Mexico State, 6'2", 230. Both of these guys are real tanks. So it'll be interesting to see how we do in the backfield. I think their production, is ultimately going to be based on how well they can do behind this offensive line and how well the offensive line plays. AJ Green, a lot of Arkansas fans know, a guy who played here several years ago. He's coming back after really not playing at Oklahoma State. And then we bring in a pair of freshman backs who will just kind of round out the depth there. But ultimately, you can see I'm giving this position group a C plus. I think this is a group that's taken a step back. I would have given them around this grade going into last season, maybe a B minus. But Jaquindon Jackson had a way better season than I expected. Ultimately, this is a position group that I think finished around more of like a B plus. But definitely taking a step back as we lose Jackson. Braylon Russell will split time with Washington. Those two will be our most productive backs. Washington was a second team All Conference USA player, had about over 800 yards, I believe, on the ground. So I think he's a guy that's going to be really productive for us. But ultimately, it's going to be the two of them. And I'm giving this position group a grade of a C plus. Switching over to the receiver position. So this one's a tough one. So this one's going to be really heavy on the transfer portal. Andrew Armstrong, Isaac Tesla, Isaiah Satania, Lucas, you can see those guys in the key losses section. All of those guys are NFL caliber players for the most part. Two of them are on NFL rosters right now. Tesla was a third-round pick to the Detroit Lions. And this is going to be a tough room. So I think of this room, if you remember 2 years ago, not last year, but the year before, Armstrong, Tesla, these guys came in from like the FCS and Division II level, and we didn't know a lot about them. In that first year, it wasn't super productive, but the second year it really was. So this year, I'm going to anticipate more like that first year. We bring in a lot of group of five, like non-power four conference guys. You can see Omega Blake, who I think could be our leading receiver this year, was a second team All American Athletic Conference player out of Charlotte. Raylan Sharp and Cam Shanks, two smaller receivers, going to play the slot out of Fresno State and UAB, respectively. And Cam Shanks will add to the return game as well. But these two receivers are going to be really helpful in the slot. And then, I mean, there's only four guys I really could mention here for notable additions, but there's so many more that are going to be on this team as well at the receiver position. Talk about Courtney Crutchfield, a guy who played receiver for Missouri, really didn't play too much, but was originally committed to Arkansas, four-star recruit, decommitted, went to Missouri, didn't do anything there. He's now come back to Arkansas. So we'll see if he's contributed. It seems like he's been a little slower throughout the offseason, but we'll see what he can do this year. Jalen Brown, a receiver out of Florida State, is a guy that is going to be in this receiving room as well. So a lot of receivers coming in, a lot of receivers going out. But ultimately, I give this grade a C minus. And really, I could give it even a little bit lower, but I think the tight end Rohan Jones from Montana State, you can see first team all Big Sky. I think he's going to be a real big addition here. I don't think he'll replicate the success of a guy like Luke has, who's switching to Ole Miss now. But I think he can be really helpful for us. And then you can see in the returning players section 4 guys that really just didn't do a whole lot. Nobody had more than 5 catches or 100 receiving yards. So it's going to be a lot of transfer portal players this year, and we saw that 2 years ago. Like I said, when Armstrong and Tesla and Tyrone Broden, a lot of those guys came in, and I expect much of the same this year. I think at that time too, we had a pretty productive quarterback, kind of like we do now with Taylor Green. So if the offensive line can hold up, give Green time, I think these receivers can really do well. Their strength is downfield. They're a lot of smaller guys. You can see the weights on a lot of these guys. A lot of them are sub 190 and even like sub 170. So these are guys that are going to want to get downfield. So as long as we're able to block, I think that these guys could be really productive this season. But ultimately, like I said, I'm going to give them a C minus. This is the group I could see the biggest variance on. I think they ultimately could be in the B plus range if we see the production they gave at the non-power 5 level, at the power 4 level, which is really difficult to do. So we'll see if they can do it. But ultimately, a C minus. In the offensive line, I'm giving a C. So this one's a lot of people I think is going to think the best position group coming in for Arkansas this year. I'm a little less high on it just because I think of a couple reasons. So reason number one, our best returning player, you can see third team All SEC player Fernando Carmona. He's going to be kicking inside, I believe, to left guard, and you'll have Corey Robinson the second, who you can see in that notable addition section, be the left tackle. So Carmona, who was our best offensive lineman, I think it's going to be just a little bit less productive opportunity for him. Honestly, just kicking inside, you want your best offensive lineman playing on the outside, the left tackle, the right tackle position. So him playing at left guard, I think it's just going to minimize the talent just a little bit, not a lot. But that's reason number one. Reason number two, the interior line, so what we did have last year on the inside, is all gone. So Addison Nichols, who primarily played at the center position, Patrick Kutas, Joshua Braun, who played at those guard positions, they all transfer out. Kutas goes to Ole Miss, Braun goes to his third SEC school in Kentucky, and Nichols goes to SMU. So those aren't just small schools; those are really three really high level schools. So it wasn't necessarily a lack of production. They were good players for us, but they're just ultimately transferred out. And so that's a really big reason why I'm seeing us struggle a little bit. We lose a lot of those interior guys, and we replaced them with a couple guys that have a little bit of like snaps at the highest level. Kobe Branham played for a little bit for us last year, redshirt freshman, not a lot. Obviously, he redshirted. Caden Kittler is a transfer in from UCF, who's going to be our starting center, so that's helpful to have a lot of production at the Big 12 level coming in there. And then Shaq McCroy and Marcus Dumerville, those are going to kind of round out the depth for us. 2 guys that come at the Power 4 level. McCroy, a younger guy, Dumerville, like a graduate player. Both of those guys are going to add some depth. McCroy is a huge guy. Dumerville, I think, is just going to be able to have that versatility to play either on the inside or the outside. And then Marion Harris should be that starting right tackle. So this is a spot where if those guys who transfer in, Corey Robinson II, who was an honorable mention for the All ACC conference, Caden Kittler, who was a starting center at UCF, if those guys come in and are really as productive as they were at their previous schools, Fernando Carmona is as like impactful as he can be at the left guard position, and Branham and Harris take that next step, I think we really can be a little more productive than this. But ultimately, I'm going to give it an average offensive line. If you're comparing this to the other teams, and that's really what these grades are, right? Like if at the quarterback position, I gave Taylor Green a B plus. If A plus is Cade Klubnik, Garrett Nussmeyer, B plus is not too bad. So in this offensive line spot as a C, it's just an average offensive line amongst the Power 4 teams. So we'll see how they do this year, but ultimately I've given them a C. Now we're going to switch over to the defensive side of the ball. This is probably the group I'm the most highest on compared to like consensus and maybe just other Razorback fans. And I can see why people would be down on this. So Landon Jackson's out. He was a second team All SEC player, one of the best defensive players we've had, honestly, in a long time. Almost 50 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. It's going to be really hard to replace his production. And then Eric Gregory, Kiwi Rose, 2 guys you can see who are currently competing for NFL rosters. So you ask, why is this group possibly going to be as good or better than they were last year? Couple reasons. So first, the transfer portals additions we get at the defensive end position. You can see two of them right there. Philip Lee coming in from Troy, a guy who had double-digit tackles for loss. Justice Boone, a graduate player out of Florida. Another guy who's not on there, but defensive end Ken Talley, a player out of Michigan State. So all three of those guys are going to come in, try to replicate Landon Jackson's production, as well as Quincy Rhodes Jr., a 6'6", 275 junior, played a little bit last year, as well as Charlie Collins, who is more of a depth guy, but we'll see him, I think, improve a little bit this year. So you got five guys trying to replicate really two players and one specific player in Landon Jackson. So we'll see how that goes. I think that they're going to do better. I think that people anticipate. And on the inside is another reason why I'm really high on this unit. Cameron Ball, a redshirt senior, guy who's been at Arkansas really his whole career. 6'5", 320, four tackles for loss last year. He's going to be a real veteran on this defensive front. Ian Jeffrard, a huge dude. You can see 387 pounds. He's going to play a lot of nose tackle. But another guy who's going to be really impactful, David Oke, who is a defensive tackle from Abilene Christian. Amongst the NFL draft community, it seems like he's really garnered some buzz. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does this year, coming from that FCS level. I know a guy, Anton Junkaj, a guy who was on our team last year. I know there were some high hopes from him, who was at the FCS level, and he kind of busted, I think, a little bit. So there's a little bit of burn there. Just like, is he going to be as productive as people are hyping him up to be? I believe he will. So a guy on the interior, I think those three guys, Ball, Jeffrard, okay, I think are going to be three really impactful players for us this year. The rotation amongst the defensive line. So ultimately, this is a group I'm probably the highest on compared to where I think other people see it. But ultimately, I've got him at a B minus. Linebacking core. So I've given them an A minus. This is the highest grade I gave any positional unit. And it's really because we return our two most productive players. So Xavier Sori Jr., Steven Dix Jr., both are two leading tacklers last year. You can see Sori almost had 100 tackles. Dix had a little over 70. Really, only player we lost was Brad Spence, who's headed to Texas. Carson Dean, who really didn't get much production, is also headed to Purdue. But this is a team. This is a unit. That we return a lot of players at, and a lot of high level players. So last year, this is a unit I would have put around like a C plus C range because there was a lot of unknowns. Sori was a transfer in from Georgia, highly touted program, but you just didn't know if he could do it for Arkansas. And ultimately, he was able to. And Steven Dix Jr., I think, outperformed what a lot of people thought from him as well. So this is a unit that really didn't lose a lot. You lose Spence, but you return Sori and Dix, your two best linebackers. And then you have Tavion Wallace, who was the best recruit coming in for this class, four-star recruit at the linebacker position. And I think it's going to be really helpful for him to learn behind those two guys. He's in a spot where he doesn't have to start. He's going to get to sit back. So despite any maybe injury possibilities, he's going to get to be a depth piece and kind of learn behind those two players. And that's really what you want for those freshmen, is not have to start immediately if you don't have to. And so I think it's going to be really beneficial for him. Defensive backs. I'm giving this group a C. This is kind of like the receiver position, but on the defensive side, where it's a lot of transfers in and a lot of transfers out. So transfers in, Connie Walker, bigger corner from Oklahoma. He's going to be really helpful for us this year. Julian Neal, who may play the nickel, a guy who is transferring in from Fresno State. Safety Quintavious Scandrett, a defensive back who came from the MAC Conference, Eastern Michigan. And then defensive back Jordan Young, who's out of the University of Cincinnati. Caleb Wooden is another guy who's not listed on here, but is out of the University of Auburn, who will be part of this defensive back group. But those are the guys coming in, and they're going to have a lot of production to replicate. So that includes Danico Slaughter, Hudson Clark, Marquise Robinson, three guys that graduated, ultimately all UDFAs, but are currently fighting for position on an NFL roster right now. And you could see a lot of them had a lot of production last year, several interceptions, lots of tackles, several pass deflections. So those are guys that we're going to have to replace. And despite them being players that are competing for NFL rosters right now, I don't think this position was necessarily one of our strengths last year on the defensive side, but they are guys that we're going to just have to replicate production at the very least. And with a lot of transfers coming in, we'll see if that's possible. You can see the returning players section. There are a couple guys coming back. Safeties, Larry Worth III, Miguel Mitchell. Larry Worth III played a lot of reps at linebacker last year, so expect him to maybe take over in this defensive back room and like Jaden Johnson's position, that big hitting safety who's going to play in the box, strong safety, bigger guy. So a 50-plus tackle guy last year. We'll see him a little more in coverage this year on the back end. Miguel Mitchell, a guy who transferred in from Florida last year, played a little bit, not too much, so he'll probably have a bigger role this year. And then Jaheim Singletary was really that other guy. He's going to play a lot on the outside. So expect a starting lineup around of Singletary and Walker on the outside. Julian Neal may play that nickel, and then you're going to see Miguel Mitchell, Larry Worth the third in the back end, and probably some Quintavious Scandrett and Jordan Young. So ultimately, that's the defensive backs position, and I'm giving them a C. Then we got our last position, the special teams unit that nobody cares about too much, but really is going to be a pivotal role for us this year. So I'm giving them a B. There's a couple returning players. We'll start with them. Punter Devin Bale, a guy who had 45 yards per punt, which is honestly really good. We've struggled at the punting position. I'm sure a lot of Arkansas fans know over the last several years. So it's nice to have a guy, I think, that can be a solid player at the position and not a detriment for us this upcoming year. And then kick returner Rodney Hill. So he'll be our primary kick returner, I imagine. He played the role a little bit last year. He was really our number one returner, so he'll be back this year. Our notable additions, though, I think is where we can be a better unit than we were last year. That's kicker Scott Stasic. He was a he's a freshman this year. He was, according to ESPN, a three-star recruit. I believe the second best kicker in the nation. So you could see in the key losses section that we lost Ramsey and Shipley, two guys that graduated, but their field goal numbers weren't that great. And the fact that we had to play two different kickers really shows you kind of the picture of what our kicking season was like last year. So if he can just be what they were, which was not good, I think he'll be better than that. Then I think we can have an improvement from what we were last year. And then the biggest addition, really, of all is the first team All American Athletic Conference player, Cam Shanks. So he's a third team receiver, but a first team return man, one of the best return men in the country. He's going to be our punt returner to replace Isaiah Satania, a guy who was really hyped up to be a really good return man. Ultimately, he wasn't that bad, but I think a lot of people thought that he had a lot of meat left on the bone. And so I think Cam Shanks is going to come in and immediately be better than that. So I'm giving ultimately the special teams unit a B. So that's our position group